I've been wanting to practice some palette knife flowers, so I thought I would walk you through my process today. And while I wanted it to be mostly a practice session for myself, I find it really unsatisfying to just practice on a cutting board or the counter or a baking sheet, and after you go to all this hard work just wiping it all away, it seems dreadfully sad. But at the same time, I didn't really need an entire layer cake. So I just took one cake, one 6-inch cake, and I cut it in half, and I just spread on some raspberry jam I had in my refrigerator, just to stack this cake and keep it really simple but still tasty for the people who got to eat it. Alright, so I'm just going to quickly zoom through how I frosted my little mini cake here with a crumb coat and then the final coat. There's nothing special about it, and it's a super small cake, so it's not even technically challenging or particularly beautiful, but in case there's anyone out there who wants a refresh or reminder or wanted to see how I went about this, I'm just going to keep it in the video. If you want to skip ahead to the actual palette knife flower part, please feel free to do so. Alright, now that we have our cake frosted completely with the crumb coat and the final coat on there, I am just going to use several different colors to create the tones I want for my flower. Now this is just me kind of practicing, so it's not terribly important, but at the same time, I really wanted to go for a deep rose color, and then I also wanted to create a secondary shade that was a little bit lighter. So in the darker rose pink, I added a little bit of purple as well, and I also have a green on the side. So I now have all my tools and colored buttercreams and my palette knives here, and I'm ready to get started. Before I even touch my little palette knives, I'm using just a regular small offset spatula here to spread out the buttercream onto my cutting board. Make sure if you use your cutting boards in your actual kitchen and for pastry that you clean it really well, because the buttercream is sitting on here for quite some time and it will pick up any flavors. For example, if you cut onions even a couple days ago, those scents might remain. Anyway, I have my palette knife here, and first I'm going to go in and scrape up some buttercream to create a little buttercream triangle base, or kind of a pyramid base on the bottom. So I'm also using this as an opportunity to clean up some of the edges, and now I'm just going to press my palette knife back and forth at about a 45-degree angle along my cutting board until you see this shape appear on about 1/2 to 3/4 of your palette knife. Now I'm going to go in on my buttercream on the cutting board here, and I'm just going to pick up little bits at a time, pressing down and away. And here I started on the right side. I am creating a petal that will be attached at the left side and will kind of curve up at the right. So you can see here, the more I pick up, the larger, the longer my petal will be. And depending on how far up into the buttercream you go, the taller or wider your petal will be top to bottom. So now that I have this petal on my palette knife, I'm going to bring my cake in front of me and kind of imagine where that petal, where my flower is going to go, so I know exactly where I want to place this first petal. You don't have to draw or scrape into your cake, but especially when practicing or getting the hang of this technique, I do think that it is wise to get that visual. So I'm just pressing down and then gently releasing and taking away my palette knife. This is really quite easy when you're working on a flat surface like I am here. It is much more challenging when you're working vertically on the side of a cake. So I am just going to walk you through the rest of the petals I made on this cake, repeating that same exact technique time and time again, creating that kind of triangle, pyramid mound on the bottom of my palette knife, picking up buttercream at that kind of 45-degree angle, alternating between picking up from the right side, as you see me doing here, and then alternately on the left side for petals that attach on the right side instead of on the left. And then after a while, I am going to pause in the middle of my flower to add in some leaves. But for now, I'm just going to let you watch in peace. Know that my technique is not changing, and all of this I have left in real time. Nothing is sped up. I obviously cut out little bits when I'm pushing away my cutting board and pulling my cake towards me, but otherwise this is more or less the exact amount of time that it took me to create this flower. you can see I've been working my way inwards from the outer edges of my flower, and now that my petals are meeting here in the middle, I've created a space where the two petals coming from the right and the left have matched up perfectly. And now in the center, I'm just going to add a little bit of a center for my flower. I just used a little bit of black gel food coloring to color just a tiny bit of buttercream here. Just for the center of my flower, you certainly could use yellow or orange or whatever other color suits your fancy. Now with the petal that I am creating here, I want to make sure that it is long enough that it can tuck behind and then wrap around the front of that center we just created. So it does look kind of flimsy here, but I really did need that length. As you will see, I'm going to slip it between where that black center of the flower is and the petal on the right side, attaching it right in between there. And then after I place the petal, I can use a palette knife, or you could use a toothpick or even your fingers, just to maneuver the petal and shape it around as you like it. It doesn't always fall perfectly, but luckily for us, buttercream is very malleable. And so now we have a really three-dimensional image going on. Before, we of course had the petals lifting up at the edges, but now it really seems like the flower is coming off of our cake. Okay, so now that we have more or less the top of the flower, I want to add in just a couple of leaves at the sides, because we're going to get to a point when we add the bottom petals that it's going to be really hard to get the leaves kind of tucked in there without ruining all of our hard work. So I'm using the same exact palette knife here, and I'm just pulling up some of the green buttercream I have smeared on my cutting board, and I'm just going to press flat down against my cake and then pull away through the center. I'm going to repeat this process a couple more times, both on this left side and on the right side. The technique on this next petal is by far the trickiest that we will see today. It is only slightly different from all of the petals we've created so far. So I'm going to go in exactly like we've been creating petals, picking up buttercream at that 45-degree angle, and this time I'm going to intentionally keep the petal quite small and then change over from my palette knife to a toothpick and then use the toothpick to maneuver the petal into the place I want it. This is particularly useful for the petals that are on the bottom of the flower and for petals where if we stuck our palette knife in there, they would smush all of the other or some of the other petals. I, as you can tell, really struggle with this. It is definitely one of the reasons I want to practice more. But, buttercream is relatively forgiving, and so if you put a petal onto your flower, onto your cake, and you're like, wow, I hate that, you can just remove it, just pluck it off. And if it's a little bit too messy or gooey while it's room temperature, just stick it in your fridge for 15 minutes and then it will be a little bit easier to kind of carve off of the cake. But I think flowers are pretty organic things, and so any shape or size or direction of petals I think is pretty okay. Once you are satisfied with how the flower looks, if you feel like you've added enough petals, if you've moved them around to your satisfaction, at the end of that, I was satisfied with how this looked, and I just created a few more leaves before I called it a day. And I just did exactly that same technique as I did before with the green, creating that triangle and pushing through the center to create my leaf shapes around the outside. And there you have it. There is my lovely, I don't even know what flower I would call this, palette knife flower practice. As I mentioned, it is much easier to do this on the top of a cake or cookie than it is to do on the side. But as I practice more and more, I hope to show you other variations and sizes and styles of flowers that you could use your palette knives on, both on the top and on the sides of a cake that you make. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was enjoyable to watch. if not helpful, in your own baking practice. And if you do, try these palette knives out in your own home kitchen. I would love to see them. So don't forget to tag me, especially on Instagram. You can find my Instagram handle. It's just Maddie Brame. It's down in the description box below. I would love to see your variations on this technique. Alright, once again, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed down below, please consider doing so, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye!